Welcome, everyone. Ladies and gentlemen from all over. We're here at part 5 of the Vice Advice series, and we're going to cover envy, jealousy. Welcome to you. Nice meeting you. And just to give a little background, so I've been ready. This is the 5th part of it. As I said, it'll be an 8-part series, which we began four weeks ago. The first part was on anger. The second part was arrogance. Third part was desire. And last week, the 4th part, we discovered coveting, covetousness. And now we are into envy. And as I mentioned, each of these parts is self-contained. You don't need to hear them all, but it's always beneficial to see them as one big picture. And I've been covering, as I've mentioned a number of times, focusing not on the negative, so to speak, but how the negative brings the positive. Because in general, there are 2 ways to deal with all kinds of challenges. One way is to symptomatic medicine, where you deal with a problem and you try to remedy it through a Band-Aid or through some type of short-term solution. But we all know the healthiest way and the long-term way is to uproot it from its source, meaning to get to the bottom of it and transform it and harness it toward the positive. So growing up, particularly in the Hasidic tradition, the approach to everything is always, instead of battling darkness, we try to bring light. Instead of fighting demons, we try to discover our angels, our better angels within. But at times we do need to deal, and we cannot ignore the fact that we do have vices and we do have flaws and shortcomings. But even that needs to also be addressed in a positive way, not demoralizing someone, telling you you're a bad person and how terrible you are, but really looking at the root and anatomy and the root and source of these vices, and then seeing what is the driving force, the driving engine behind every vice, and then looking for solutions, as I said, that aren't just short term but longer term. So that's been a general approach to all these different vices we've been addressing. And obviously apply the same thing to envy. So the few questions that I've been asking each week is obviously, what is the root source of envy? Why are we jealous? Why do we have that? And when you think about it, jealousy is one of the more despicable and very almost embarrassing type of feelings. Who wants to feel jealous about someone else? What does that tell us about the human condition, about the human being, that you feel jealous if someone else has something? Why don't you feel secure with what you have? So it's a very sensitive but also important topic to address. So what exactly is the root of envy? Then of course the next question would be is, what brings us to be envious and jealous? Are there any redeeming elements to envy? Anything positive about it? Can we harness that positive stuff? That's will be part of this discussion, as I said, consistent with the previous vices, so to speak. Now, I've also been categorized them under the 4 archetypes, as cited, and the sources for this is Reb Chaim Vital, the great Kabbalist student and documenter of the writings of the Arizal, Rab Isaac Luria in the 16th century. So he has a book called Shari Kedusha, the Gates of Sanctity, cited in Tanya chapter 1, where he says that there are 4 archetypes, which in turn encompass a bunch of subcategories. And the 4 archetypes are based on the 4 elements: fire, water, wind or air, and earth. In Hebrew, Eish, Mayim, Ruach, Ofar. And in that order. So Eish is the archetype that connects to, as the Tanya cites, to number 1, anger, which we discussed at length in part 1. And in part 2, we discussed a second component, a second outgrowth of the archetype of fire is arrogance. And then comes the second one. The second, which is we're middle of, is water. That water, as we discussed at length, is, as opposed to fire, which is a fiery, passionate, and aggressive force, water is much calmer. But water is the root of all pleasure. Because water gives birth. Everything that grows on this earth, everything that we have pleasure comes from water. And I discussed at length, this doesn't just mean vegetation and things that grow, but water in general, the watery personality is the one that is an indulgent personality. Water, where we flow our desires flow. Now, as we discussed, desire doesn't mean it has to be a negative desire, but also the negative desires connect to water. Water itself and the desire, taiva, as he puts it in Tanya and from the Reb Chaim Vital, Shari Kedusha, has two subsets, subcategories. One we discussed last week is coveting. So coveting is an outgrowth of desire in a particular way, because desire can be all kinds of desires. You could desire things that have nothing to do with another person. But coveting is you actually covet something that belongs to another person. So it's an outgrowth, according to this interpretation, of desire. And the second subcategory is what we're discussing in this class, and that is envy. And we'll soon be discussing the difference between envy and coveting. But envy, too, is an outgrowth of desiring. You're desiring what someone, you're jealous and envious of another. So it's a form of desire. Truth be told, there's a book called Orchos Tzadikim, another Kabbalistic work, where he associates envy with anger. But that's not the let's put it this, the approach we're taking here. It has elements of that, because there are different interpretations in what kina, in Hebrew the word for envy is kina, to be jealous of. We'll be discussing some episodes in the Bible and other places where this is mentioned. But kina, the Rashi says in the Talmud of Megillah, on 6b, he talks about two types of what kina has two meanings. One is actually to be, people, there's the expression, kanes kinesi, a passion, a zealousness. Zealousness can also be a translation of kina. So that would be associated more with the passion of anger. Like you get angry and therefore you want to vengeance. That form of jealousy. But the jealousy we're going to address more is the second interpretation, where a person is actually envious of another and wants what the other person has. Or maybe they're not even want it. I should qualify it. Let me correct myself. Coveting is you actually want what the other person has. Jealousy, envy doesn't necessarily mean you want. You're just jealous that they have it. Which could also mean if you'd be happy if they didn't have it, and then it wouldn't bother you. Coveting, as we discussed last week, is actually coveting. Someone has a home, has a wife, has other possessions, has other belongings, and you covet what they have. And you actually do go out of your way to obsess, to the point that it includes even manipulating that person to give it to you against his will, either by buying him off, and like this type of obsession with someone else's possessions. Jealousy is not the same. Jealousy is far more of an emotional feeling. You're just jealous and envious of another person and their success. And in an interesting way, you may not even be bothered. If they didn't have it, you wouldn't covet it. So you're not coveting their object, you're just jealous feeling of another, which makes it even more bewildering. What is this? If you covet, it's one thing. You want to have that. You don't even want it. So there's a classic story, a story they tell, joke, or however you want to put it, where two people had an argument. I'm sorry, let me backtrack. It goes like this. A person comes to a rabbi and he brings an animal. He says, "Rabbi, is this animal kosher?" And the rabbi checks it out and says, "No, the animal's not kosher." So he incurs a loss of $10,000. That was the cost. The rabbi says it's not kosher. He's not going to use it. He's not going to eat it. Then a few weeks later, the same person is in a lawsuit in front of the same rabbi, in a beis din, in front of a court of law, Jewish court of law, an argument, a financial argument, where the person is claiming, "You owe me $5,000. And he says, "No, I don't owe it to you." The rabbi or the rabbis listen to the evidence, they listen to the witnesses, to the arguments, and then they come back and say, "Yes, you're right, you owe him $5,000. And the same person starts yelling and screaming, "The rabbis are corrupt, something's wrong with you, how could you be so distorted?" So here's the question. You just a few weeks ago incurred a loss of $10,000 without a complaint. You didn't complain that the animal wasn't kosher. Fine, that's the law. What are you going to do? Here, it's half the money, $5,000, and here suddenly the rabbis are corrupt. So the answer given is very simple. There, no one was winning. There, you lost the value of that animal. Here, what's bothering you is that the other person's winning $5,000. And that's what bothers us. So if you think about it, it's a very almost disgusting midah. It's a disgusting temperament. Not midah. What I say for midah? Fact. It's an attribute. It's a very disturbing attribute that you simply are resentful and jealous of another person's gaining. Not so much that you want to win, But as long as that person is gaining. So all this goes into the category of kina in Hebrew. I will talk about jealousy and envy. And I'm going to address this, as I said, on many different dimensions. And as I said, it's also one of these feelings that, anger, people get angry, it's much more visible. Kina is something you can be burning in your heart with jealousy, and you're not going to acknowledge it, because it's not even befitting. Many people don't want to admit that they're jealous of another person. And I'm sure if you think about your own life, I'm sure there are times that you feel that way. You may not even want to feel that way, but you just do feel. So what lies behind this kina? But before we get into that, let's just cite a few episodes, actually in the Bible, in the Torah, that mention the word kina. The first place, you may know, is right in Genesis. Cain and Abel were two brothers, and Cain was jealous of his brother Abel because God had taken his offering, and he was jealous that he was getting special treatment, to the extent that it led him to go and kill his own brother, which was not a small thing. Murder in general is a big thing, but here it was also killing a quarter of the universe, because there was Adam and Eve and Cain and Abel. It's like killing 1/4 of the population of the earth, relatively speaking. So that's one episode. Another place where we see the word kina, we see the word kina when Rachel and her sister Leah, so it says, "V'tekan Rachel ba'chesa," Rachel was jealous or envious of her sister Leah. Her sister Leah was, of course, her older sister, whom for Jacob married first, was fooled, but Leah was bearing children, and Rachel was not. She was jealous of her sister and her blessings. And of course, maybe the most famous of them all is the jealousy of Joseph's brothers to Joseph. Where Vayikanu by Echav, his brothers were jealous of him. They felt he was getting preferential treatment by their father Jacob, and he wove for him a special, beautiful Kusenas Pasim, a colorful shirt or garment. And they were jealous to the extent that they went ahead and plotted to kill him. Instead, they threw him into a pit. He ended up being sold to slavery, and the rest of the story is known, how he's led to Egypt, first in prison, first a slave, then in prison, and then finally rise to power to become the viceroy of Egypt and actually save the same brothers that wanted to kill him or at least get rid of him. So you have here stories of kina, all very disturbing stories, because it's not just jealousy of anybody. In each case here, it's about a sibling. That's interesting. Cain and Abel, brothers, sisters, the brothers with the tribes. So that is a particularly nauseating element when it's a brother or a sister and a sibling, where there should be natural love. You should be happy for the success of your sibling. So just accentuates and emphasizes how kina, this cancer called envy, can affect even envy to your closest people around you. It's interesting, there's a Talmudic statement that says that a person is envious of everyone except their own child and student. So brothers and sisters can be envious of each other. Even children can be envious of their parents. But parent will not be envious of a child, and a teacher will not be envious of a student. Now the natural reason, of course, is and not because a parent is more refined, because you see that same parent can be envious of their own sibling or someone else. It's because your child you see is an extension of you. So if your child's successful, it's in a sense a reflection of your success. So why would you be envious? I must say that there are people who have told me that my parents are envious of me. And I have witnessed, at least to the naked eye, seemingly contradiction to the Talmud. So there's the classic humorous response. The Talmud says, Ein Odam Miskana. A human being does not have jealousy in their child and their student. What happens if someone's not really human? Some people become so degraded in their emotions that you can't call them Odam. So I don't want to really use that scenario because I don't want to use anything that's derogatory. But the fact of the matter is there are people, like another expression that says, Ein Odam meiz panav b'fnei bal chayve. A person will not have chutzpah in front of someone that they're in debt to. Let's say you took a loan from someone for $1,000, $100, whatever it is. So the nature of a human being, because we're just refined people, is such you're not going to, in front of that person's face, deny it. That's why it's based on the law. That's why it's a law that if a person says you owe me $10,000, and the other person says no, I only owe you $5,000, you accept that, but you make him swear. It's to take an oath. Why? Maybe he's lying. Because a person is not going to lie. If he says I don't owe you anything, then he's not in his debt. So then it has to go to a real trial, and you have to do things because you don't know who's right. But if he says he owes, which means he's acknowledging I'm in your debt, the nature of a person, he's not going to lie. He's not going to have that nerve and chutzpah in front of someone that is there in debt. But then the world asks the question, what do you mean? We see people who do. They say 5,000 and they are lying. So the answer they say is ein adam. Again, a normal human being. Once a person has become so debased and so despicable that they are able to do that, you don't call them an adam. Anyway, that's as an aside. But what we're addressing here is the normal situation with a parent, and I just wanted to mention that for the record. But it does give us a little insight, because in a way you could say that Talmud is not necessarily a compliment to a parent and a teacher, just saying, because you feel that you can take credit for your child or for your student, that's why you don't have jealousy. Obviously, we can also explain it on a deeper level, that when it comes to our own child or student, you become less self-consumed and you really do allow them that dignity that they should deserve what they have, and you don't have jealousy, not necessarily because of selfish reasons, because you see them as reflecting on you. But however you explain it, we definitely see there are exceptions. But let's get to the real situation. Is that what about all the situations besides parent and a child and a student, where we do find kina, and we see it as being a midah, I use the word despicable, disgusting. I'm looking for another word, a little more. How many words? An ugly midah. It's an ugly feature in a person to have that jealousy. So let's now go into the anatomy of it, the real anatomy, and use these stories as well, because of course the question is asked. You're talking about Cain and Abel, fine. But you talk about Rachel and Leah, Rachel and Leah, or the brothers and Joseph. Did they really stoop to that level of just becoming plain, just blatant jealousy, like we're jealous of each other on that petty level? Is that really what's happening, or is there something more going on? And that's what we'll address. So what is the root of an anatomy of jealousy and envy? So there's one root to all our vices, which I've discussed in the previous weeks, and I'll just repeat it again. And that is the dissonance, the existential dissonance that we all experience. Like I mentioned, if the best version of a human being, the healthiest version I should say, is a newborn child. We're like freshly fallen snow before we've been impacted by society, by social mores, by parents, by educators, by different standards out there. So if you want to know the best version of yourself, like I always say, technology, a iOS 8 is better than an iOS 7. A Apple version or computer version 10 is better than version 9. But I think in human beings, version 1 is better than version 2, meaning the purest and undiluted form of what a human being is, the healthiest is a newborn child. And when you look at newborn children, you do not see vices. No one is born with natural vices. We have maybe tendencies, and we may have predispositions, but you don't see children born. There's no such thing as a child born angry, or a child born arrogant, or a child born just coveting, or desiring just things just for desire, even if it's self-destructive. And you don't see also a child that's envious. Now you say, 1 second, I see my children all the time want to have someone else's toy, I want that candy. So first of all, that, I don't know if I would call that jealousy or envy. Those are short-lived moments. You know, it's not like the child is obsessed. You'll see how long does it last. So we're not talking about something that is envious in the sense I'm envious of that person. Children are children. They see other people have things. Secondly, it's not necessarily that they have the natural envy gene or something like that. It's just that in the course of life, actually, when you're close to other people, you see someone has something, it's natural. You may also want it. But we're talking about envy and jealousy. We're talking about a sustained feature in a human being, where they're simply jealous of someone that can consume you and it can affect you long term. We're not talking about this immediately. Like you see children say, I'll never talk to you again. And 10 seconds later, they're talking to their friend. So children's emotions are fickle in that sense. And frankly, as I mentioned, every vice a child develops as a result of picking it up from their parents or from their adults. We learn to lie from our parents, we learn duplicity, we learn anger, we learn arrogance, we learn desire, we learn coveting, and we learn also envy. When you see parents talking about others, you see them resenting others, what do you think? Because that's the first place where children pick up these feelings. And if you think back, you'll see people growing up in homes where at the table, at the dinner table, or throughout the day, a mother or father are always complaining about something, or always talking about others. What do you think is going to affect? What do you think the child's going to grow up to have that same attitude, always talking about others, in that sense? And the same thing is with envy and jealousy. So what that tells us is that we are not naturally envious people. We're not naturally jealous people, and we don't need to be. And if you think about it logically and psychologically, it makes total sense. Logical and psychological. I never thought of it that way. Yeah. Okay, that's a nice expression. Okay, why? Because let's go back to what I said earlier. What exactly lies at what's the significance of being jealous? Somebody successful, they got a raise this week. They were promoted. They got married to a beautiful spouse. Successful in some other way, whether it's materially, spiritually. So you may not celebrate for them, fine. But why be jealous? How is jealousy going to help you? I mean, what is the benefit of it? You know, there are benefits. You could say there are things that have a benefit. People go steal. Why do they steal? Because they have no money or they are greedy. So they go steal. There's a benefit. It's a distorted way of getting that benefit. But there's something. What's the benefit of jealousy? What exactly are you going to gain from being jealous? And let's say that person didn't get that success. Would you be better off? So you can argue the reason that it bothers people is because it reflects on our own inadequacies. You know, if nobody was successful, then my failure is not so blatant. But if everybody's failing, I don't stand out. There is that element. So you could say jealousy is a result of basically our own insecurity. And if everybody else was failing, and I wouldn't have anyone to... So then, you know, I'm not so bad off. But that only begs the question, why do we feel that way? Why do we feel inadequate like that? That's why I go back, a child that's nurtured and loved and validated in the things they do, they come home from school and they're given that support and reinforcement, what do you think happens? The child develops a good, healthy sense of self-confidence, self-esteem. What happens when you have a situation? Just the other day I heard from somebody, breaks your heart, which said every time I came home from school and I achieved something, even though a childish achievement, I got a good mark, I got a compliment, my mother and my father always dismissed it. Who do you think you are? And like it's not good enough. Never gave me the satisfaction of just feeling that I was successful. So I feel I'm constantly a failure because I never satisfied them. And I always am haunted by their so-called expectations. Now what did the parents essentially do? They undermined, instead of giving the child and nurturing and reinforcing and validating that you are valuable, that you have something to give, even if it's not to this, and the child's a child on a childish level, that just builds up a confidence that that person can navigate in life and feel good, or feel that they can succeed. Now what has happened to this child, the person I'm talking about, and this happens to everybody, you grow up feeling this inadequacy, feeling as a failure, feeling that it's never good enough. So what do you think is the next step? You're always going to be looking, hey, that person has something. Why, I wish I had that. Instead of looking inside, because you don't have confidence in your own gifts, you don't even know that you have them perhaps, what do you start doing? You start looking for gifts elsewhere. That person has something. I want it. I'm jealous of it. So it's not even a rational thing. It makes no difference. You may never even get what that person has. Remember, it's not coveting. It's just jealous. You have a jealousy. You're jealous of other people. As a result of what? Of you never really having something that you say can be mine. Now I know the question immediately many of you will ask, one second, I know people who are very confident in what they have and they're still jealous. We'll get to that. But let's start with a more, I guess simpler if you wish, I don't know if it's simpler, but more basic element. So that is a very good way of analyzing the anatomy and root of jealousy, that essentially it's not jealousy, it's insecurity. You're not confident in what you have. So what do you think first thing you do? You start looking around. And you see this, the grass is always greener on the other side. Sometimes you find out that that person has a life that you don't want to envy, but what it looks to ostensibly, it looks like it's something you envy. You know, the classic example they give for this is a person who was really jealous of another, and then they find out that because that person was blessed with finance and was successful and so on, then they find out that that person is suffering from a terminal illness, and it's friends that put together money to help that person. And suddenly, what do you say to yourself? Am I envious of that person? So you're envious for completely external level. I remember this external dimension. This I remember very vividly. 9/11. Everybody knows 9/11. The year was September 11th, 2001. The day when that Tuesday morning, we're here in New York and Washington, and the terrorist attacks that, even though it took thousands of lives tragically, but it could have been a lot worse. The bottom line was the World Trade Centers were struck. So as a guy who came to see me a little later, there was then Cantor Fitzgerald was one of the firms that was deeply impacted, because that was those floors, and most of the employees perished in that tragedy. There was a fellow who worked in Cantor Fitzgerald who he was killed, but a friend of his came to see me around a year after the tragedy, close to the first anniversary. And I knew a number of people, unfortunately widows or others that lost family and so on. And he came to me literally with tears in his eyes. He said, "You know something?" He said, "I worked in an office building, a small office building near Wall Street, which was within eye distance. I could see within sight the World Trade Center. And that morning, I went to work. My friend who perished was on the 101st floor, I think, one of those floors, 100th floor, 90th floor, something like that. And I could tell you every day was a source of like a thorn in my side, because I knew he had a spacious office with his bay windows looking out over the Hudson. And he was just always gorgeous when I went to visit him. And here I am in this little dingy office watching. And I really resented it, and I was very jealous of him. And good, lo and behold, what happens that morning? And I cannot get over, I feel so miserable and horrible about myself that I carried these feelings against my friend for no reason. He didn't do anything to me. He didn't I could have been hired and he took away my job. He didn't belittle me. He didn't embarrass me. He didn't say, "Hey, look, my office compared to," he didn't gloat. It was just simply my own little thing. I used to look from my little office and look at this guy sitting there in that office. And now he's not here. And I wish I could go and speak to him and say, "I'm sorry." Not that I hurt him, but that I carried these feelings for no reason. And look, what am I envious of? What am I envious of? I'm not happy at all that it happened. It's not like I'm happy or now I'm not envious. I feel embarrassed that I was envious. I wish he had his office. I wish he had his life. He left a wife, children. I feel. So I told him, go to the person's buried where they didn't find the bodies, but where the person is buried, and they know where it was, some remains or something, whatever it was, and beg and go and pray to pray for forgiveness. Not that I think he'll forgive you because you didn't do anything to him, but maybe you could speak to his soul. My point, of course, that I'm bringing up here is a perfect example, a glaring example of how envy is completely hollow, empty, and yet we are capable of it. As we speak right now, you and I and almost anybody is not immune from feelings of envy and jealousy. I'm not saying it consumes you. I'm not saying it's your predominant life experience, but we sometimes get to that point. And when you think about it, it's like as empty as it gets, because there's nothing behind it. Again, if you say, even if a person gloated and they put you down and you feel they took something from you, even then, it's still a despicable type of attribute. But especially if it doesn't have any of that. So you have to say that since we're not born with it, and at the same time it's like a completely irrational type of sentiment, that there has to be some very deep cause that would cause us to be able to stoop to that place. So this brings us back to the dissonance that I spoke about, mentioned before, and discussed at length in the previous parts of this series. And that is the dissonance, and we'll use the words of the Arizal, the Kabbalistic concept of the Tzimtzum Harishon, which I know sounds mystical and cryptic, but let's be the simple English. It's the ultimate dissonance, the ultimate disconnect of a concealment of the true reality of existence from our conscious experience. In other words, what we see is not what you get. We look at the world, we look at experiences, we look at ourselves, you see the surface level. We don't see what's going on beneath the surface, which is why we could so easily be tempted and seduced by instant gratification. Even while you're satisfying, indulging yourself, you may know it's destructive, you may know it will not last, it's like a sugar high, and still it controls us. Why? How's that possible? We're rational human beings. You're about to do something which is destructive. Betray someone, violate someone, and yet you can succumb. How? Your mind understands it, but your emotions are powerful. They're very impulsive, and they take control, and you obsess, and then you get what you wanted. And so, as we all know, pleasure is such that it's always more pleasurable to want than to have. Once you have it, you become more rational and say, it wasn't maybe worth it. But then you go ahead and do it again. The famous story with the angel of darkness. A guy lives an indulgent life his whole life. He lived a very, very selfish, narcissistic life. Hurt people, stepped on people, whatever served his interest was his thing. Finally, his day came. He comes up to heaven, and he realizes now the day of reckoning has come. He goes before the heavenly court, and he knows this isn't good. He has no defense. But he had his fun, but now it's over. The party's over. And he stands in front of God, in front of the angels, in front of the divine court. Do you have anything to say for yourself? They gave him the list of everything he did. And it was bad. He hurt people. He was selfish. He was, the whole thing. The portrait of Dorian Gray story. A person indulged himself in his own. He says, no. So the court says, okay, fine. So we'll deliberate. You step outside in the heavenly chambers, in the halls, and we'll let you know. We have to review it and see what your verdict and what the consequence, what your punishment is. Anyway, he goes out feeling sad. It's all like his head is hanging, and suddenly he meets this very gentleman, this very distinguished gentleman who says, "Why are you feeling so bad?" He says, "I lived a life complete self-indulgence. Now the day has come. I have to give an accounting, and I don't have anything to say. It wasn't a good life." So the guy says to him, "You know something? Nothing is lost. Nothing is hopeless. I'll make a deal with you. If you give me your soul, I'll give you another chance to go back down to earth and do it again. And this time you could correct and live a different way if you like." Of course, this was the deal with the devil. The guy thinks about it, says, "Really? Can you do that?" He said, "Absolutely, but there's a deal. You got to give me your soul." Now, this guy was a shrewd fellow, so he says, "1 second, okay, I'll make the deal, but one condition. When I go back down to earth, I need my memory to remember what happened here. Because if not, I'll just do it all over again. So you need to give me that. I'll remember what I did. I'll remember the consequences. I'll remember our conversation." "No problem." The Prince of Darkness says, "No problem. Whatever you want." They sign. This guy is ecstatic. He goes back down, starts a new life. And what do you think happens? And he remembers everything. He remembers the consequences. He remembers the deal. He remembers everything. And he does everything exactly as he did it in his previous lifetime. This is one of the classics they give when you go to drug and alcohol rehab and they talk about addiction. This is what happens. You hit a situation, you say, "I'm going to change." And then when things get a little easier, you gravitate right back to where you were. Because human beings are very fickle. We're actually absurd. Life is absurd, and we're crazy in a way. We're not consistent. Who has this not happened to? You made a strong determination, a strong resolution. A few days go by, you're back to square one. That's not because we're nuts. That's because God actually created a dissonance. He created dissonance, concealing God's own presence, the presence of truth and reality from us, so we can get caught up in the moment, get caught up in the temporary, and forget about the permanent, and do damage, and we may even know it. And that lies at the heart of all vices, but especially the ones that are more irrational than others. So it's not about being rational. It's just the fact that we do not sense that we're part of one organism. So when you see someone successful, you see they have something, they've gained something, instead of saying, 1 second, if they're winning, if they gained, I've gained, because they're all part of one big picture. Think of nature. Would it make sense, for example, that one creature or one plant or one microbe would say, hey, I'm jealous that that other creature has gained something? No, because they know in nature that when one part of nature gains, the rest of nature will gain. It's a symbiotic and give and take relationship where it's like the healthy human body. If one part of the body is successful, the other parts of the body get successful. You exercise one muscle, the rest of the body gets stronger. But that's when you realize and you understand it's all part of one. What does the tzimtzum do? It conceals it. So now we think we're isolated. I have nothing to do with you. We may have a contractual agreement where I do services for you, you compensate me, but there's no sense of integral unity. As such, we're each on our own. If I'm on my own, then I can be jealous of you. Does it make sense, for example, the right arm to be jealous of the left arm? It's ludicrous. The brain to be jealous of the heart, the liver to be jealous of the lungs, and say, even the waste organs in our body that you can say are dealing with the garbage of our body and expelling it. Are they jealous of, let's say, the mind and say, why can't I be a refined mind? No, because everything serves its purpose. And without eliminating the waste, the mind won't function properly. So it's all one symbiotic, one structure, and everything benefits. So jealousy at its heart is the sense of isolation, the sense of separateness, that I and you are not part of one thing. And therefore I can be jealous of you. We're not even talking about coveting. Coveting is actually coveting. I want your possession. That's also an attribute that is what's the word I was saying? That is inappropriate, and I discussed that. Desire is yet another, the general umbrella. Here we're talking about specifically the jealousy and envy. So yes, it's hollow, it's empty, it makes no sense, but we're fully capable of it because we live in a world that is a hollow world. And it's very easy to be deceived into thinking that you and everybody else is part of you, and therefore the only way you can relate to another person's success or another person's gains is simply envy. So it's one of the worst midas, one of the worst attributes a human being can have, but it's a result of that dissonance. If there was no tzimtzum, there was no concealment, then you would sense that person as part. Like that, go back to why a parent or a teacher is not jealous of their child or student. And not necessarily because of selfish reasons, because they sense it's my child. Why would I be jealous of my child? My child I've invested in my child, I've spent time to educate my child. I'm going to be jealous of something that I am proud of. Because you feel it's part of you. Again, not necessarily your success, not in necessarily an arrogant way. It's part of you because that child's success is your success, is the success of the world. You see it today especially. Look at the polarization, especially in the United States, of the pro-Trump and the anti-Trump. I'm not getting now into any particular position. But the extremes. For some, he can do nothing right. For others, he can do nothing wrong. I mean, it's completely unrealistic. It's the epitome of essentially narcissism. Everyone's so self-righteous. I have an absolute monopoly on truth. And anything someone else says is impossible. This is classic casualty and the collateral damage of a tzimtzum that does not allow us to see things in a balanced way. We're all part of one human race. I say this to myself. You may not like the president. Some people didn't like President Obama. But at the end of the day, like any normal person says, if the president is successful, the country is successful. If he's not successful, the country is not successful. So then the delusional argument goes, no, but if we can get him impeached and get rid of him, so we'll have a different president. But that obsession is, again, self-righteous, all about my way of understanding is the only way. So it may not be actually jealousy which we're addressing, but it has a similar root, and that root is this self-contained, smug attitude that I got it figured out, and anyone disagrees with me, something's wrong with them. Now, I'm not idolizing anyone, I'm not deifying anyone, everybody has their strengths and weaknesses. There's no person on earth that doesn't. But why don't we have that ability to look at it that way, and including ourselves? As if I'm perfect, that's why I could say that about others. So let's go back now to the jealousy. So the jealousy, I would say, is a direct outgrowth, unhealthy jealousy, of this concealed state, this dissonance is maybe the best word, the dissonance between the truth and your experiences of it. And there is a dissonance, a disconnect. And that disconnect creates all the vices, but especially the one that we're talking about here, envy. The envy. So what do we do about this? The answer, of course, is obvious. If the tzimtzum is indeed the root of it, eliminate the tzimtzum, you'll eliminate its symptoms, including envy. Okay, that's easier said than done. It's not so simple to eliminate the tzimtzum because God created the tzimtzum, and the tzimtzum is necessary for existence to survive. You take away the tzimtzum, the divine light, as the Kabbalists put it, would completely consume us, completely overwhelm us, like an ocean, like a tsunami that would just cover up all of existence. So tzimtzum has its purpose. It allows for a conscious identity, an independent consciousness like ours to emerge. So to eliminate, basically the self is not the objective here. Even though we should sense that we're all part of one thing, like the right arm shouldn't be jealous of the left arm, but we're not trying to make the right arm into the left arm. So the challenge is now not to eliminate the tzimtzum, but rather how can we see existence in a balanced way? That there is diversity, you're you and I'm me, but we need each other and help each other. So it's not about necessarily eliminating, saying the lungs are the heart and the heart is the mind. No. But they recognize that they work with each other. And this is what Chassidus introduces, the Chassidic thought introduces. Chassidic thought introduces the concept of bittul, some humility, modesty, or maybe a better way to put it, suspension of self. So it's not about annihilating your individuality. It's recognizing that the right arm is part of something bigger, and so is the left arm. So it's not a competition. And therefore, that's the ultimate way to fight this envy and jealousy, is to recognize that the other person that you're jealous of actually may be doing something that ends up helping you and helping the world. So contemplating on that and meditating on that can be a tremendous advance us in a tremendous way toward, I don't say eliminating, but definitely mitigating and weakening the senses of envy and jealousy. That's one thing. But this also leads us to something even deeper. Because as I've discussed in the previous parts of this series, every vice, as bad as it is, has to have a positive root. I mentioned the root of it is the tzimtzum, but there has to be something positive even in that feeling. So what is the positive element? And this is the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Chabad Rebbe, explains in Ora Torah, in his classic work, on the chapter in Vayetze, in Genesis, on the second episode I mentioned. The jealousy, the envy of Rachel to her sister Leah, Rachel to Leah. And he explains it's impossible that such divine women, holy women, people who were refined, who were matriarchs, they are the basis and foundation of our people, should stoop to something like jealousy. So he explains interestingly that jealousy has a positive side to it. And he cites the Talmud. The Talmud says it this way: Kina sofrim tar b'chachma. The word kina is used, envy. So that literally means the envy or the jealousy, the envy of sofrim, of scholars. Sofrim literally means scribes. But the envy of scribes, which refers to scholars, to academics, to teachers, is tar b'chochma, increases in wisdom. In other words, in simple words in English, healthy competition. And this is even an economics 101 lesson. What is competition? No one likes competition. You want to have a monopoly. Why would I want someone competing with me? Why would I have to worry about them? Why do I have to always try to be better than them? But competition, when it's in moderation and in a healthy way, actually is a force that brings us to excellence. Let's talk a simple example in sports. In sports, you have competing teams or competing individuals. You ask, I remember reading a few months ago, when it was last year, Novak Djokovic, who was the number one tennis player from I don't know where it is now, but he was there. And they asked him and he proved his game over time. And they asked him, what was the key? He said, the key was my opponents. When Roger Federer and Nadal and some others kept beating him, it drove him crazy, and he was jealous of their success. But that jealousy, instead of driving him to become negative and bitter and wanting them to fail, made him a better player. And when you don't have competition like that, you will never achieve excellence. So we all gravitate, most of us would say, I'd rather just not have competition and not achieve excellence than to have to worry about competition. I understand that's the human notion. That's the lazy human being. But the Talmud is telling us, no, healthy competition is what drives you. It's like you play against someone else. No, you never know how strong you are until there's resistance. How will you ever develop anything you're doing if there's no one that is challenging you? The same thing's intellectually. I can speak as a writer, as a speaker. The greatest breakthroughs happen when you're challenged. The greatest breakthrough happens when you are resistance. When you you have an idea, and someone challenges and says, no, that idea is wrong. Or I have a contradictory text. Or I have a counter-argument. So, of course, initially our so-called childish side would say, I'd rather not have anyone arguing with me. But let's be honest, anyone that's a little intelligent wants to build a business. You want them arguing with you in the beginning. You don't want the argument come later after you spend too much money and lose the money. You want to hear the counter-arguments. You want to hear your weaknesses right away, which is why in any good business plan you have to know the best-case scenario, the worst-case scenario. Not because to make us feel bad, but because you want to anticipate. And I know, like, when you brainstorm an idea, one of the key things to really get crystal clear clarity is to challenge your own idea and say, one second, here's the idea. Let's say we did not do this idea. What would happen? Let's say we do the exact opposite of this idea. What would happen? These scenarios create more clarity, not less. So yes, it causes more frustration and it causes more time, and you could even have a state of confusion until you come to clarity. But once you've challenged something, you've really resisted, and you've presented a counter-argument, the result will be, besides the peace of mind knowing that you really went through and covered all your bases and did not leave any stone unturned, but the crystal clarity of the idea will be much deeper, because you've looked at it from every angle, which is like what every scientist really does, supposed to be doing, an honest scientist. You test something in all environments. You can't just test it in the cold or in the or in heat. You have to test it in extreme cold and extreme heat. If you want it to be able to be a theory that stands up, you have to make sure that every scenario is covered. So say, why do I have to go through that? Because that's what guarantees clarity, guarantees truth. So in that sense, kina, envy, when used properly, can end up becoming a tremendous motivator for success. Had Cain, instead of killing Abel and succumbing to his most base result and saying, I'll just kill the competition, had he instead said, you know what, let me dig deeper. Let me find the qualities that I was blessed with and show God that I can be better than Abel. And not necessarily with anger. That would have been a healthy expression. Rachel did not envy Leah in the conventional way. It wasn't envy in a bad way. It was envy that actually caused Rachel to cry out, to cry to God, why can't I have a child? And she ended up having children, and special children. Joseph, interesting, Rachel's jealousy of Leah gave birth to Joseph, and Joseph then became the one that the other brothers were jealous of him. So everything twisted around. We'll get to that in a moment. So Rachel's jealousy is seen as a positive. It's seen the cry. It's like almost saying, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel, look at that person succeeding. So instead of saying, I'm going to be jealous of them and I wish them ill and I wish them to lose, I wish them failure, you simply say, no, God, give me strength now to be even better. This pushes me like a marathon. There's other runners and you see them successful. It should get you going to want to surpass. That is the healthy form of jealousy. So there you could harness, even though, as I said, it comes from dissonance and comes from that symptom, comes from that concealment. But now, instead of just eliminating the concealment, say, nothing to be jealous of, actually use the negative feeling of kina, of jealousy and envy, to actually be a better person. So that's what the Torah teaches, which is so fascinating. It's not just saying, let's eliminate the vice. Use the vice against itself by turning it into a catalyst for growth. And that's when healthy competition really works well. As I said, even in economics you have this. in the United States, the idea of antitrust and monopolies. I'm not talking about whether the system works and whether people manipulate it and whether there's corruption anyway. That's not the point. I'm talking theoretically. Theoretically, the idea of healthy competition. Now, we know in Jewish law, for example, there's the concept of hasagas gvul, a competition that's unfair. That would be the equivalent of someone has a store, they're making income, suddenly a much bigger store comes and opens up right next door and destroys the parnasa, the income of that small family. That's hasagas gvul. That's not healthy competition, because they don't have the recourse. What are they supposed to do? They don't have the resources. But these are delicate and complicated laws. It's not every case. Because if you have a community, let's say, that has a certain population, and there is room for more than one grocery store or one of this, and they're not, one is swallowing up the other, then there's absolutely, you don't just suddenly say, hey, you know, obviously this needs to be determined case by case. But my point of the matter is, there's something in between unfair competition, something where there's no competition at all, and healthy competition. No competition at all will create mediocrity. That's a given. Too severe competition can create the real war. That's not what we're looking for. We're looking for something where there's a healthy tension going on, a healthy angst, because each one is looking to become better and improve. And in that sense, you'll see in history, some of the more classic competitions created the best products. Because there were two, and no one could be resting on their laurels. Nobody could take for granted that they have control of the marketplace. And each one became better in their own regard, in their own way, even though they would have preferred that the other ones just disappear. So this, of course, requires a measure of humility, bittul, where you think about God's bigger plan. He didn't just create me, he created 7 billion people on this planet. Each one has a unique, indispensable contribution to make. And I should be honoring and celebrating that, because I also have an indispensable contribution to make. And my contribution they need, and their contribution I need. Would anyone, for example, say I'm jealous of oxygen? Why? Because why does oxygen have oxygen? I want the oxygen. No, because oxygen is necessary for you to breathe, and if you didn't have oxygen out there, you wouldn't have what to breathe, you wouldn't survive. So you want oxygen, you want the photosynthesis and the other forces in nature to do what they have to do so you can be able to breathe. Why? Because you're there, you see immediately the benefit to you. But there's no room for jealousy because, one second, you're dependent on it. It's actually helping you. So you want to really control it to the point that you completely destroy it and then you don't even have a source of that sustenance. So you see how ludicrous it is when you know and recognize the benefits that one thing gives to another. So finally with Joseph and his brothers, what happened there? So this is a longer discussion, really goes beyond just the jealousy. There are many commentaries say the jealousy there was also a healthy version. What was their upset? Because Joseph, they felt was arrogant, and they felt that he felt that he's going to be their leader, when Judah was supposed to be the leader, the king. So they saw Joseph as the problem. So the Vayikanu there, the jealousy was not a jealousy with jealous of him getting special treatment, but jealous in the sense of it was inciting them to here's a guy that just thinks he's the center of the universe. That's one explanation. There are other explanations as well. But regarding our discussion, however you interpret it, there's always the negative and there's the positive. Because the answer to the brothers would have been, Joseph brothers, you know what? If you think he has special qualities, instead of trying to destroy him, why don't you do more work on yourselves and let your unique qualities emerge? No, they turned against him. That would be the problem. So you see from all of this that envy and jealousy is indeed a very absurd and terrible and ugly feature humans have. But you also see where it's rooted. It's rooted in that divine concealment. It's rooted in that black hole. And black holes create black personalities. That's how it is. And the counterforce to the antidote is to recognize those roots, to recognize what causes that type of dissonance, and therefore that weakens and defangs the enemy, because what it does is it says, I feel separate from that person. Maybe I should work towards connecting with people. So I know this may sound a little strange, but maybe giving charity and helping others is actually the best antidote to jealousy. Because instead of seeing others as apart from you and I'm jealous, on the contrary, let me help. which of course is like Joseph did that though they were jealous of him, instead of him repaying them in kind, he actually embraced them and said, it was not your fault. It was God that sent me here. I'm here to help you. Which Joseph gets great reward for that, not reciprocating. It's one thing you could say, fine, he didn't go to hurt them, but he should have at least been upset, and that didn't bother him, because he actually saw the hand of God. And that's the key thing. Yes, they were jealous of him. Yes, they did things they shouldn't have done. And we're not getting to, let's say, good intentions, bad intentions. Joseph transcended that all, and he said, look, the bottom line is I'm here, and I'm able to save my family from the famine, and that's all that matters. Meaning God led me here. You were the agents, but God led me here. This is the attitude of a healthy person responding to other people's jealousies and resentments. He doesn't look at it like, oh, tit for tat, or how could you do that? But he looks at what is the bigger plan? What is the bigger plan? If a person asks that question, most jealousies would disappear. But we will go back, even after this discussion, to gravitate back to our own selfish place. I'm trying to give a taste of another reality, a pre-symptom reality, or a post-symptom, a pre-symptom picture of things that are post-symptom, and above all, also the harnessing. Recognizing it's not enough just to eliminate and say, you know what, you're right, there's one God, created the universe, everybody has something to give. But more importantly, it's to harness any feelings of envy towards something positive. You're envious of someone for good reason, something that they've achieved. I'm not talking about envy for nonsense, but for a good reason. Go ahead. Maybe that's a sign that you should work harder and succeed. Now, will you surpass them? Maybe, maybe not. It doesn't matter. The bottom line is, it has pushed you to your limit, has pushed you till it hurts, that you should go and transcend your situation and achieve more. When you have that, it's a very powerful force. It's like resistance. Like you never know how strong this hand is unless the other hand resists. And you push, and this one resists, and you keep pushing, and you build up that momentum, you build up that strength. So try it out. Try it out. Once you harness, and like any energy that's harnessed, the energy begins to not consume you, because it's being channeled. Excuse me. Think of fire. Fire is a very powerful energy. We talked about it about anger. Fire that's unharnessed is destructive. It will destroy. Harnessed fire is the essence of life. The temperature in our bodies, the warmth, the sunlight, the warmth of the sun, the warmth of different forces in life that are necessary. So you need to harness it. It needs to be there, but you can't let it be too strong, because then it destroys, or too weak, and then it will also destroy. So it's about balance. It's about the balance. And the harnessing, what the harnessing does, takes that energy, and besides just uprooting it from the source, it also directs it. It directs it towards something productive. You're jealous of something, you think, so go ahead, do it better. Someone's produced a product, someone wrote a book, a piece of music, and it's being successful. You're jealous? Write a better book. Write something even better than that person did. And I don't mean that, in other words, just to get even or anything, just really should motivate. The motivation of growth. So kina, in that sense, envy and jealousy can end up being a fuel for great success, a fuel for great achievements, if indeed you harness it properly. So with that, I'll sum up that we've covered the fifth part, which is envy. Next week we're going to move to the next archetype, which is wind, and that's going to be about frivolity. I'm not even sure how you pronounce it. Frivolousness, frivolity, and emptiness. We'll talk about that next week. So on a concluding positive note, may you find very healthy and productive competition that challenges you, that gets you out of your comfort zone. The comfort zone. And the comfort zone we love, but we never excel there, because it tends to you tend to wallow, you tend to procrastinate, you tend to just be self-satisfied. Whereas that element of seeing a hurdle, or seeing someone doing it better, someone doing it faster, pushes us to new horizons, which is, of course, the ultimate objective. So, my friends, this has been Rabbi Jacobson talking to you about the My Life advice, Vice Advice Series Part 5. Yes, Part 5 about envy and jealousy. If you have any questions or comments or would like to weigh in, you can do so on our website, meaningfullife.com. Sign up also for our newsletters, our free materials we send out. We recently began something called Soul Workout, which is like a short, concise, hands-on tools and exercises, virtually touching every area of life. And there's more to come. We always love your feedback. We always love your thoughts and your critique, which makes us better and more excellent, as I said. So until next Wednesday, everyone have a very blessed week, a very motivated week, a very healthy envy and jealousy week, where it only propels us to greater dimensions of growth. Thank you all. Okay. Yeah, this is a part of the blessing.